Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, Honorable Dean, Faculty of Management Studies, Parul Institute of Management and Research, Parul University. Our respected guest for today's webinar, Dr. Arindam Roy, and other guests who are present in this webinar. So today we will be having a very good insightful session on contextuality of public policy. As management students, we all are eager to know what are the linkages, what are the interlinkages between public policy and the domain of management. So with, without wasting any further time, I would like to introduce our honorable guest for today. Dr. Arindam Roy, he is presently an associate professor of political science at the University of Burdwan, West Bengal, India. He has worked on several government projects related to public policy like development-induced displacement, impact assessment of Manrega, and contemporizing the district gazetteer in areas like Burdwan, which is an important area of field study in West Bengal. He has also published several scholarly articles on terrorism, the state is no saint either, on other topics like medical pluralism and myopic public health, privatizing the pandemic, a neoliberal remedy, and he has also published a book entitled Mapping Administrative Theories, Problems and Prospect in the year 2018. He has completed his PhD in political science from the University of Delhi on impact of socio-cultural diversity on delivery of health services in India, a case study in the district of Burdwan, West Bengal. His area of interests include public administration and political theory. So, before we start today's program, I did a little attempt to introduce Sir to my students, and also I would request Dr. Bijal Zaveri, our Honorable Dean Ma'am, for few words of insight.
Yes. So good afternoon to all of you. Today's our guest Arindam sir. We heartily welcome at Faculty of Management Studies, Parul University. And it's a really great opportunity, all management students, that they are going to listen in the area of public policy, and which is, we can say that, very recent trends. I think you can find out this public policy. These are the most IIMs are offering this subject. And in Gujarat also, we have started this public policy specialization in Parul University Faculty of Management Studies. So special thanks to Chandrima Madam for organizing such a wonderful session for our students. And definitely see some mindsets of the students regarding public policy, that it's not our area of interest sometimes, because they feel that some more technical things, and they feel that more technical jargons for the public policy. But what I feel that if with any sector, whether we choose agriculture, healthcare, marketing, or we can say that digital marketing also, that public policy, which rules and regulations, which laws are required, that is the most prominent area in the area of public policy. Today's session of Arindam sir will throw a light in the same area in a diverse sector, that how public policy play a very important role for the management students. So I would like to hand over this platform to sir, to you. And after this session, Chandrima madam, you can collect some question answer from the students. So we will make some question answer now after this session. Okay, thank you so much, sir, for spending valuable time with us. Thank you.
Before Sir starts, ma'am, with your permission and with Sir's permission, we have with us Professor Rajni Ranjan Jha. He is a former dean and retired professor of Banaras Hindu University Department of Political Science. It's a moment of great blessing and happiness for me that Sir, being my supervisor and mentor, has joined this initiative, which is my maiden initiative. Sir, I would like to request a few words of blessings from you.
Thank you so much, sir, for your presence. Thank you so
much. I'm really glad to be a part of this webinar, which Chandrima has organized. She has been a very good student of ours. She has produced a very good PhD thesis. And I'm really happy that this is her first attempt to organize a webinar and I wish it all success. I thank Arindam ji and all the
Thank
other
you.
members who have joined it, and I look forward to many such successful efforts on the part of Dr. Chandrima Das, who has miles to go
Yes, yes.
in area of public administration. With these words, I am really delighted to be with all of you in this program, important program, and I wish all the success to the speaker, Dr. Arindam,
Thank you, sir.
Thank you,
and
sir.
Parul University. Thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of it. I am really happy. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, sir. So without wasting any further times, now Dr. Roy, we would like to hear from you regarding
Thank
the
you.
topic that you have selected for today.
Respected honorable, respected Dean Faculty of Science, our former Dean Faculty of, Faculty of Management, I think, Faculty of Management, and the former Faculty of Dean Faculty of Management, Professor Chandrima Das. Well, at the outset, I would like to convey my sincere gratitude and thanks. Am I audible? I'm sorry. Am I audible?
Yes, sir. Completely.
Okay. Well, at the outset, I would like to convey my sincere gratitude and thanks to the Parul University and to specifically Professor Das for inviting me over here and allowing me to share my humble ideas with this August gathering. Well, the topic that I'm going to share with you today is the contextuality in public policy, some reflections. Well, before I move straight to the topic, as Professor Das has told me that I have 40 minutes, designated 40 minutes and 5 minutes for interaction. So to be on the safe side, because it's very difficult to encapsulate this topic within the 45 minutes. So to be on the safe side, before I move on to the topic, let me very briefly sum up what I propose to say here. Well, the major objective of my paper is to foreground the criticality of the contextuality in policymaking. This is perhaps one of the most neglected topic in public policy discourse. Policymakers usually take a very reasoned apathy towards this contextuality, and it has got a strong colonial legacy. The colonial policy makers, with their objective of serving the empire with this twin objective, that empire building as well as empire and the mercantilism, they usually take a very safe distance from these innumerable socio-cultural nuances of the context. And in order to escape this complexity, what our colonial administrators did, they took a homogenized view of the context, homogeneous view of administration and governance. And in the post-colonial governance, we have seen the typical legacy of that particular mindset, and our policy makers try to discard these nuances of ethnocultural diversity. And as a reason of which, in most cases, policies, in most cases, we took the supply side of the policy, that why a particular policy fails because there is a supply side bottleneck. Either the fund allocated in the budget is not satisfactory, either we do not have the proper manpower. So this supply side is always taken care of. But it is the demand side, the other side of public policy, never take into cognizance. And therefore, a mismatch between the supply side and demand side can be bridged properly if we take the context into cognizance. So my paper, with a particular reference to a recent study that I had conducted under ICSSR Impress project in 2019-2021, I would rather try to draw on certain examples, especially cherry-picked from that particular study, in order to substantiate my argument here. So without wasting any more time, let me go straight across to my presentation. Just a minute, I'm just... okay. So as I have mentioned that the topic that I'm going to deliberate on is the contextuality in public policy, some reflections. Now, before I move on, let me show you the roadmap. Here I had first, spell out the objective, then the introduction, then situating the contextuality. Why contextuality? And then I would argue that the public policy has traversed along from a typical positivist mindset to a post-positivist public policy. And then this, in order to understand the context, I want to unpack the nuances of socio-cultural context, what we need to take up as a policymaker, and then the context, the puzzle, the contextuality and public policy, and with particular reference to the study that I had just referred. And finally, I would conclude with certain observations. So as I tell you that the objective, as you know, the systematic execution of an ordered decision, policymakers, as I just mentioned, usually refuse to venture out of their reasoned enclosure. They always try to remain within the typical positivist systematic kind of setup. They never wanted to venture out of that. As a result of which, the ground level reality, on the other hand, reminds us that the strict adherence to this positivist methodology is never give you a guarantee that a particular policy succeeds. So for the success of particular public policy, you need to get out of this reasoned enclosure, get out of this positive mindset. Now, therefore, the proper cognizance of the socio-cultural factors embedded in a context is equally important for the success of any given policy. So only the positivist methodology is not sufficient. For the success of a particular policy, you need to consider, you need to take the context, socio-cultural, economic, political context into consideration. Okay. The next, the paper that I'm just referring to is with special reference to an empirical study that I had mentioned, that it was a part of Impress project, where I try to argue that this is particular a policy myopia, that don't get out of your reason enclosure based on positivism. So this policy myopia can be overcome by resorting to the post-positivist policy approach informed by technique as well as context. So technique alone cannot give you the respite. For that, you need to take the context into consideration. Now in the introduction, as you know, the policy is an intriguing terrain. It is a complex, interplay of administrative, social, political, as well as economic components. Therefore, there is hardly any fit for all, formulation of public policy. There's a famous public policy expert, Lindblom. Lindblom often categorized that policymaking is like a science of muddling through. Okay. So, but our policymakers, unfortunately, have a they're always caged of this, positivist frame of mind, and they ignored the contextuality. So, in our policymakers, mostly driven by the attributes like homogeneity, impartiality, neutrality, and they try to put anything and everything within the policy straitjacket and ignore the ground level reality, especially the socio-cultural nuances, the socio-cultural milieu, and where the policy is actually applied. Consequently, as I have mentioned, the huge amount of money goes in vain from the public exchequer goes in vain. And the paper I'm referring to was basically based on reproductive tract infection. I mean, on reproductive health program, and to be more specific with reproductive protection in rural West Bengal. And it intends to underscore the importance of socio-cultural factors in policy making. Now, go straight into the keywords. I had mentioned the contextuality in policy making. Now, let us situate what is contextuality. Why do we require contextuality? The first thing, as I mentioned, that intricate dynamics of public policy that demands proper cognizance of socio-cultural, political, and economic milieu. So therefore, it requires, and the fate of any given policy is largely contingent upon it. So until and unless you take this context into consideration, your policy cannot be a successful one. Next, it has, this contextuality has a potential to unravel the very puzzle. As you have seen that if you just look at the several policy that we have taken since independence, there you find that a particular policy becomes a grand success, whereas the other policies falls flat. People simply rejected it. So why this is so? What is the puzzle behind it? The puzzle is basically the context. In most cases, we fail to consider the context in applying that particular policy, in formulating that policy. So this contextuality is the concept that can help you unravel this particular puzzle. But until recently, as I had mentioned earlier, that policymakers seems to have blissfully overlooked this this particular context under the homogenizing science of management based on the positivist approach. So they are always arguing in favor of homogenizing science of management, and they discard any sort of or these innumerable ethno-cultural, religious, linguistic diversities that our society is beset with. The present paper basically intends to interrogate this mindset. Okay.
Lecture online.
Now what?
आज है वेबिनार હતો કાલનું જ કીધેલું કે આટલા ટાઈમે આટલો વેબિનાર હશે એક થી.
Those who are talking, please, can you please mute yourself?
Now let us unpack the socio-cultural context. As I mentioned, that it is comprising of several factors. The impact of contextuality, that is socio-cultural diversity, on the delivery of public service did not receive adequate academic attention for various reasons. The first, obviously, the insensitivity of the scholars. Scholars never take it very, exciting. Second, the prejudiced official view. The officially and the bureaucrats always, give up. They look down upon this kind of contextuality and all. They don't take it to be studied separately. And last but not least, the apparent reluctance of the policymakers. That is also very important factors why this context is not being studied properly or academically. Now, sociocultural diversity is basically an analytical frame. It is, as an analytical frame, sociocultural diversity is a problematic. It is very difficult to pin down the exact meaning of what is actually the sociocultural diversity. Now, for the convenience of discussion, we can identify 4 major markers of this sociocultural diversity or of the context. The first one is religion, ethnicity, caste, culture. Obviously, gender is there, but gender is basically an intersecting variable. So it is within religion, it is within ethnicity, in caste. So therefore, I'm not mentioning gender as a separate category, but it is an intervening category which intersects with all the other factors that I had identified. Now, take off the first component, that is religion. Now, religion, as you know, it is one of the oldest and perhaps the most powerful marker of this socio-cultural diversity or the context. It has the potential of both a strong in-group bonding among the believers and a strong out-group enmity among the non-believers. Okay. So it actually fastens the followers in a rigorous system of belief, code of conduct, attitudes, and practices which they share in group. Therefore, it substantially constructs the behavioral pattern, uh, especially their attitude towards life. So religion is basically a factor which constructs your behavioral pattern, which includes, since our study is based on health behavior, so it actually constructs your health seeking behavior as well. In my study, if time permits, then I can cherry pick one or two such narratives which strongly corroborates my argument, saying that how this religious factors determines your health seeking behavior. For example, as I just mentioned, for example, the fertility behavior that I had mentioned in my study, and as I told you that if time permits, then definitely I go into that particular narrative, where the behavior or the preventive health measures among the people of different is basically determined by this religion. Next, I'm not going to get into the detail because religion and this religious factor, it deserves altogether a different class to at least to touch upon the major components and major nuances of it. And so for the time being, I'm just point out only the crux of it. Okay. The next, the ethnicity. The ethnicity is another constituting factors of the socio-cultural diversity or context, which has definite bearing on policy outcomes. And it is, again, it's a notoriously imprecise term. What do you mean by ethnicity? If we just, for the time being, if you want to identify it or to define it, it actually refers to the self-ascribed cultural and linguistic characteristics of a group claiming a common origin. Now, every ethnic group has a distinct sense of history. It possesses its own culture, customs, norms, beliefs, and tradition, which have substantially shaped their behavior or the behavioral pattern of its members. Here again, for example, if we consider the tribal communities and their health-seeking behavior, we'll find how these ethnic or ethnicity or ethnic consciousness actually shaped their behavioral pattern or their health-seeking behavior. Next, another component of this context is the contextuality is class. Class is generally perceived as an economic parameter, which is substantiates people on the basis of economic potentials. Interestingly, here also, it is considered to be one of the critical component of socio-cultural context. Since it is an economic category, but it also considered as a very important factor, very important component of socio-cultural diversity. Class and ill health, if you look at the several such studies conducted in UK, that class and ill health has had a long association. It is believed that persons' likelihood of experiencing disease, ill health, and premature death is largely contingent upon their, or his or her position in social hierarchy. Last but not least, the culture. Culture is another crucial component of socio-cultural diversity, and it substantially shapes the behavioral pattern of the people. Hence, deciphering the cultural determinants would uncover the mystery, why and how a group of people behave the way they do. Now, let us come to the problematic, that is contextuality and public policy. As I had mentioned over and over again in the earlier slides also, that there is a close association between contextuality and public policy. And socio-cultural factors, plurality of socio-cultural factors is indeed an inescapable social reality. It has become a common phenomenon of our social ontology as well. And therefore, it actually determines the fate of a particular policy I had mentioned earlier. And therefore, the recognition of this socio-cultural context may answer the puzzle why a policy fails or why a particular policy succeeds. So I'm just keep for the paucity of time. I'm just skipping these particular slides as I had mentioned. Now let me refer to the study. The study I had mentioned that it is conducted in 2019 to 21 as a part of the IMPRESS project. And here again, I'm just skipping these particular slides. Now let us come to the criticality of this context or socio-cultural factor in policy making. Let us come to the finding. The study that revealed that socio-cultural factors have substantially shaped the health-seeking behavior, because I had concentrated on health-seeking behavior only in this study. So therefore, on the basis of this study, I have mentioned that the substantially shaped the health-seeking behavior of the people. And however, the contextual understanding of health-seeking behavior usually remain outside the purview of the reason enclosure of the policymakers. Consequently, people avoid some of the universally crafted health policies simply because they are not compatible with their cultural or religious sentiments. Now, ignorant of these socio-cultural construction of health or health-seeking behavior, policymakers lament that it is because of the supply side bottleneck that the policy fails, and they asked for more liberal funding that I had mentioned in the very beginning. Consequently, a sizable amount of money goes in vain as these the health policies are not being availed by the targeted section because they are not compatible with their cultural setting, their religious perceptions. But policymakers, ignorant of this, they thought that it is because of the supply side bottleneck. So let us they are actually pleading for more liberal funding, and the extra money that comes again goes in vain. Now, if I just look at the findings on the basis of the 4 parameters that I had mentioned, the religious parameter, the religious factor seems to have enveloped the behavioral pattern of the people under study, including the health behavior. Now, the first important factor that that come across in this particular study, that the reassuring factor of divine remedy. It often allows the people have the luxury of ignoring or skipping government administered health services. People are so reassured about the divine remedies that they often take the liberty to outrightly discard the government administered health policy. Interestingly enough, the health seeking behavior had no relation with, and here again, this particular affinity towards divine remedy doesn't have anything to do with your economic status. It is often said that the divine remedies are often solicited by those people who do not have the strong economic background. Unfortunately, interestingly enough, in our study, we have found out almost the different results, where I have seen that it is not because of the economic factors. The economically well-to-do people also seek the divine remedy instead of the government administered health policies. And on the contrary, those people who do not have a proper economic condition, they in fact discard these government health policies and solicit the divine remedies. The study revealed that economically weaker section, which is otherwise could not afford the private health services, because in most cases the public health services is not adequate. We all know that. So sometimes for better health, you have to rely upon the private deliveries of health services, and that is costly. But the economically downtrodden section often solicit these private health services instead of the government health services because they are not have the proper confidence on public health policies. The agency role of the state as a provider of health services seem to have been de-essentialized here. and as the God was considered as the potential and safer alternative to public health interventions. Since public health intervention never take cognizance of their cultural construction, religious construction, so they thought that God is much more, closer to their feelings, and therefore the government health services is de-essentialized by these divine remedies. Such was the allegiance of the people towards the divine remedy that it instilled a fair degree of confidence and reassurance among these people. Now, let me refer to one such remedies. One Siuli Das, 43 of age, a illiterate woman working as a domestic help, had a deep conviction that children are the greatest endowment of the Almighty. What can these doctors do if God is not responding to our prayers? Same is healing is also articulated by one marginal level with an elementary education, said that he has sent his daughter to hospital for delivery, but with great dismay he uttered that I do not have much faith on hospital and the doctors who will save my daughter if we do not give her madhuli, that is holy pendant. The doctors will do their job, but it is only He, the Almighty, who can save her. Now, same is the ethnic constructions and often determines the fate of any given health facility. The ethnic outcomes and belief are instrumental in constructing the health behavior of the tribal communities, which include their perception of disease or illness, mode of treatment, fertility behavior, food habit, and so on. A few health initiatives sometimes considered by these people as a blatant intrusion into their belief system. Because, for example, the immunization program, which is, for example, universal immunization program for children and would-be mother, is often considered by these communities as a blatant intrusion into their belief system. For example, one such narrative, one illiterate marginal worker, Dipali Baske, narrated that in our society, children are born and grow up in natural way. We do not believe in the injection or polio. Didimoni here means the sisters are often visiting our house to give us medicine and injection, but I don't let my children to take those medicines. My children have no problem, then why should I take those medicines? Though I insist not to take polio drops and medicine, my son take his children to polio booth for vaccination. Now, here is a generational gap. Dipali Baske never allows his son to take this, but his son and his take his daughter to for this universal polio vaccination. But that is a kind of intrusion of culture, intrusion of modernity. That's altogether different. But this ethnic construction often clouds our health-seeking behavior. Similarly, one Rani Shoren, 60 years old and illiterate housewife, has nicely summed up that ethnic prejudice is often in the following words: we do not need such medicine and vaccines. We are nurtured by Mother Nature and strong enough to withstand any disease whatsoever. So what use of those vaccines have if they cannot save our children from fever? As you know that BCG and other vaccination causes immediate fever among the children. So that is often creates discord among these people. They thought that this disease actually, or this kind of vaccination leads to the disease. So why should we take one such vaccination which leads to a fever to their children? So they never want to have this kind of vaccination of children. The following narratives, for example, one Somnath Mandi, 37 marginal workers, he said that today we have seen that people of our community also visiting doctors and hospitals, and that too for a mere fever and a cough. What is the same? we are used to be a strong people. We do not bother about such small incidents. We have natural resistance. God has created us to protect the forest, earth, and I never let my children to take those bodies, means those medicines. And we have our own natural herbs, which are more than efficient to treat these diseases. So another such narrative, that visiting doctors in a regular interval is not in our culture. But today, our community has also gradually become accustomed to this culture. It is really a shame for us, who had once waged war against the almighty British during this Santal Bidro. Now, by saying all this, they thought that this kind of health intervention is an intrusion to their valiant valiant cultural value system. Cultural factors are equally very strong, especially shared belief, myth, taboo, play a determining role in shaping one's health-seeking behavior. For example, generally several innumerable customs, myths, shared belief, and taboos exist in every society. For example, on pregnancy or newborn. Since my work is on this RCH program, it is replete with examples where cultural factors play a determining role. For example, one health. I'm here again. I'm just cherry picking one such very striking narrative, which actually corroborated my argument, that the one health counselor from one block of the district where I had conducted my study came out with a very interesting myth regarding the menstruation, which could have played a spoil sport for government-sponsored RCH program. I quote that I heard that very health counselor narrated her personal experience, and as you know, as a male respondent, to know about intimate hygiene from women is a very difficult, and it's very difficult to get responses from them. So I took a other way around. I rather interviewed those health counselors, those village level health workers, to get at the actual facts. So I had actually quoted those narratives and tried to analyze those narratives. So here I try to quote one such narrative, that I had encountered one of the most debilitating myths regarding menstruation in one of our awareness generation camps on sexual and menstruation hygiene. When I was interacting with the villagers and making them aware of possible ways as to how they could maintain hygiene with homemade cotton pads, one of the participants from the village questioned the feasibility of maintaining hygiene. She said that our suggestion of washing or drying up the cotton pads for reuse was not applicable, since they didn't have any discreet and hygienic place to dry up those pads. She said that she was always apprehensive of the possibility that somebody would have seen those pads or came in physical contact with them when they were put on sun, or come in close proximity of the foul smell emanating from this. For any such incident would affect the health of her husband. Kindly mark this word, that any of such incident, that if anybody comes in close proximity with those stuff, that that would affect the health of her husband or the prospective husband in case of adolescent girls. Such deeply lodged was the myth among the village women that they preferred dark and humid, unhygienic corner of the room for drying up those cotton pads instead of out at the sun. Consequently, most of the women were suffering from the fungal infections and like itching and white discharges. There is one of such narrative. Second such narrative that came out from one of the MBBS doctor working in this area. What she said, that most of the gynecological cases that I encounter every day are caused due to ignorance and suppression of facts. Please mark this word. From a very childhood, girls are taught to maintain secrecy about the normal physiological events like menstruation, and sometimes the lower abdominal pain during the menstruation are often belittled by giving the little girls with some digestives. Consequently, these girls developed the symptoms of deadly RTIs, that is reproductive tract infections. In the light of the above study, now let us come to the conclusion. I think the fag end of my the stipulated time frame. So let us come straight to the conclusion. Concluding observation. In the light of the above study, I can conveniently say that the contextual factor, the socio-cultural factor, plays a crucial role in successful realization of any public policy, be it health, be it education. Hence, the positivist rigor and the precision of public policy should be wedded to the contextual elements. The dawning of the post-positivist era of public policy discourse is welcome development in this regard. So what public policy, from the positivist to post-positivist, public policy dawned really a successful era, a successful development, where we are now slowly but steadily moving from the typical positivist rigor and precision of public policy to a contextual dimension of public policy. Okay, but here again, I must mention that post-positivist public policy doesn't mean that only moving towards the context, but along with those positivist rigor and precision. That said, would not make any difference until and unless we liberate our. So, okay, as I said, that we are slowly moving towards this post-positivist era, but theoretically speaking, it's all right. But until and unless our policymakers get out of this kind of mindset, from this reason enclosure of positivism and technocracy, and sensitizing them about the contextual nuances of policy situation, this cry of contextuality doesn't make any sense. So that's all I have to say. If I just conclude by saying this, that the contextuality has a pivotal role to play in not only in formulation of public policy but also in implementing of public policies. So there must be a proper care to be taken so that the positivist approach should get integrated with that of the contextuality or the socio-cultural nuances and political nuances of the context. So that's all I have to say. Thank you. Now over to Chandrima madam. Now, sorry, you are not audible. Madam, you are not audible. Hello.
Sir, can you remove the screens that I want to take the photograph?
Am I audible now, sir?
Yeah. Just a minute. Is it all right?
Thank you so much for this amazing lecture, sir. That was really a good learning. I think the students have also enjoyed going through the practical experiences that you have undergone while you have conducted the research. I have received a few questions in my inbox. Like the first question, a student has asked me, your case study has reflected your experiences with policy makers and stakeholders both. During the case study, during your research, you have interacted with both policy makers and stakeholders. Okay, so they are really eager to know what experiences you had undergone, like the views of the beneficiaries and the views of the policymakers, what the policy makers have to say, what are the efforts they are
Okay.
putting up, and what holders have to say, that what problems they
Okay.
are facing.
I had mentioned, I mean, in the beginning, when I talk about the theoretical frame, that the policymakers still have that kind of mindset. They are still wedded to the positivist mindset, and they thought that, well, uh, context is important, but you can manage with a homogenized, more scientific, more nuanced kind of methodology that can overcome this contextual element. So that was a kind of mindset that is typically inherited from the colonial masters, and unfortunately we are still bearing this mindset. But interestingly enough, uh, as I had mentioned that, or maybe I have forgotten to mention, that the study had two kind of respondents. One, that is the deliverers, which includes obviously the policymakers and those who actually delivered this policy on behalf of the government, on behalf of the government health services, and other those who are the recipients. Okay. Now, interestingly, uh, there are certain hierarchies which remain in between, and who played a very critical role that I had mentioned in my paper because it requires a lot of time. That is the village level health workers. The village level health workers holds the key. On the other hand, they had the dual characteristics. On the one hand, they are in the government payroll, so they are supposed to deliver the government policies formulated at the some policy making enclosure, and so they are supposed to implement it at the village level. On the other hand, most of the village level health workers hailing from the same socio-cultural context, so they knew the context better than anyone else. So therefore, they are also representing the community. Interestingly, the mismatch that I was referring over and over again, that the policymakers had altogether a different mindset. They don't bother about context. So they formulated a policy, and in most cases in health administration, you find people hailing from IAS or for that matter, any all India services. They don't have the all pan-Indian view, or for that matter, the entire and India is a country with beset with innumerable diversities. So it also reflected in their health seeking behavior as well. So for a particular policymaker hailing from a particular context, it's not possible for him to know everything. So therefore, in order to avoid this kind of complications, they often draw on the certain homogenized pattern. As a result of which, they miss the nuances. Naturally, the policies, when it goes at the policy grassroots level, people do not accept it, do not avail it. And it is the village level health workers who are actually commissioning those policies to the villagers. He or she, I mean, in most cases, they are the women workers. They knew why these people are not taking it. What went wrong? I mean, why this particular policy is not compatible with the particular context. And here, they actually, make work as a connect between these two. They negotiate with the community value system, and try to reformulate a policy in accordance with the needs. So this is a very critical issue and very critical point that, unfortunately, again, the policymakers remain simply ignorant of this particular critical health hierarchy. And in most cases, in every state, we find that these village level health workers do not get proper salary. They do not, but they are overburdened with responsibilities, especially the recent pandemic. They played a fundamental role in identifying the COVID patients, delivering the free medicines, and working as a next door worker. So that is the point that I'm to make. I think I've satisfied your question. I mean, madam, over to you.
Yes, sir. Definitely could understand about just I have a like if you can share with us the PPT. Am I audible, sir?
Yeah.
I was just requesting that if you the research work that you have conducted, if you can share with us the PPT with the students, then we can form it into a case study, and they would be able to formulate with the students. If you can share the
Okay.
PPT with the
Okay, so that
students,
can be done.
then we can form it into a case study
Okay.
and
No, actually, for the PPT, I had called. Yeah,
I will
yeah,
take
ma'am.
as a last question. As-
Just a minute.
yeah.
Yeah. Please go ahead. Yeah, ma'am. Your last question. Sorry. Hello.
Yes, sir.
You are asking that the last question. Yes.
A
Maybe there is an issue with the net.
student has asked me
Uh-huh.
how the
Sorry, I can hear you. Sorry.
and supply between the government agencies can be bridged.
Sorry, can you repeat your question once again? Actually, I can't. Hello. Can you repeat this question once again? Hello. 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 Can you repeat this question? Can you? Hello. It's not audible. হ্যাঁ, can you repeat this question? আমি শুনতে পাচ্ছি না এখানে। Okay, please do. Yeah.
Am I audible now, sir?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was asking how can the gap between the policy beneficiaries and the policy makers, there's a gap between the supplies and demand as we
Yeah.
traditionally know. So how that gap can be bridged?
No, that is perhaps the crux of the entire discussion. Basically, the title that I had referred, the contextuality. Now, taking contextual element. Now, contextuality doesn't mean only socio-cultural. It means the political, economic, this entire context needs to be taken care of. I mean, until and unless you take this socio-cultural, economic, and political context into consideration, this gap can be bridged. Unfortunately, now it has got a very long history. I mean, our policy makers, especially the colonial administration, they had a twin objective. One is the empire building and mercantilism. That in order to satisfy that they basically remain aloof themselves from this kind of societal fault lines, the social, which is based on culture, religion, language, etc. They thought that if we meddle with this, that would create a serious problem for their existence here in India or in this subcontinent. So they take a very reasoned or kind of what should I say? I mean, deliberate apathy deliberate distance from these socio-cultural factors. And after independence, soon after independence, when we deliberated upon in the Constituent Assembly about the future course of the country, there was a typical, there's a two group of people. One group thought that we need to discard whatever British, we need to discard whatever colonial. But the second group, which is a small but the most educated people, they thought that going by this emotive environment, if we discard everything which is British, that would be costly for them. That would lead to another kind of dependence. So, for the sake of this country to stand on its feet, we required at least a strong, educated administrative wing. That was not possible at that time, because at that time we didn't have we are miserable in socio-cultural index, social index or HDI index. We didn't have the literacy rate, so it was expecting a homegrown cadre of administrator at the very moment of our independence was over expectation. So they thought that let us continue with the whatever British structure, but with certain cosmetic changes, and that what we did. We had Indian Civil Service. We just made a cosmetic change, and we said that it is an Indian Administrative Service, but the structure remained the same. So that administrators initial so long catered the colonial administrator, they are now catering the post-independent government, post-independent country. No matter how Nehru actually eulogized the entire thing. Nehru is a finest literary person. So he coined certain terms like nation building. They are the veritable nation builders. And by saying this, they were basically trying to reorient those administrators to a altogether a new setting where you need to start everything afresh. Okay, in terms of agriculture, in terms of industry, in terms of infrastructure development. So these Indian civil servants who are now registered as Indian Administrative Service, they nurtured a new indigenous grown bureaucrats, but infused the same kind of mindset that they had during the colonial administration. And the next level of cadres, next generation of bureaucrats, they are inheriting the same mindset. Consequently, they had an apathy. They had a natural apathy towards diversity, towards the multicultural setup. India is a multicultural country, but they had a innovation towards this multicultural apathy. So they took a very strong apathy and deliberate inaction. They took deliberate inaction towards this ethnocultural diversity. Here, my argument is that because of this negligence, because of this apathy, there is a disconnect between the supply side and the demand side. Now, if you want, getting back to your question, if we want to have a connect between these two, if we want to bridge the supply side and the demand side of the public health, or for that matter, any public policy, we need to take this socio-cultural context into cognizance. And this context consists of social, cultural, ethnic, religious, linguistic, economic, political, and ideological setting. Right? Okay.
Thank you so much, sir. I hope the queries of the students have been nicely answered. We have reached almost the last part of today's webinar. I'm sure the students had many learning experiences. As I requested sir to share his PPT, I guess they will also be very much interested in forming a case study out of your research work. Thank you so much, sir. So formally to thank Dr. Bijal Zaveri, Dean, Faculty of Management Studies, Parul University. I thank also Professor Rajni Ranjan Jha, who had joined initially and had been kind enough to share his blessings with us. I thank officially Dr. Arindam Roy for delivering this lecture, Dr. Ajay Bharadwaj from the Faculty of Management Studies, who had coordinated with the PU webinar cell for letting me host this webinar in a very successful way. And lastly, the students who had joined the same. Thank you, everyone. We will, I'm sure we will be meeting at regular intervals from now onwards with different lecture series on management and public policy. Hoping to see you in the near future with other topics too. Thank you so much. Thank you,
Thank you.
everyone.
Thank you, everyone. So I'm leaving now. Thank you.
Yes, sir.